Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and what a great turnout. I'm honored, and it's super. It's been quite an afternoon to be in this place. You know, I was quite surprised to be asked to speak at a place like this. I mean, most people think I'm a Luddite. You know, some pre-barbaric Neanderthal. Because I don't embrace genetically modified organisms. I don't embrace factory farming. You know, on our farm, if an animal gets sick, we don't assume that it's pharmaceutically disadvantaged. We actually assume that it's something that we did, that broke down the terrain of immunity. We actually believe in more farmers instead of fewer farmers. We believe in less machinery instead of more. We believe in insourcing fertility instead of outsourcing fertility, and the pigness of the pig and all these other cool things. And so it's been a treat today to be here and appreciate the parallels between what we're doing and what's going on right here at IHMC, where the technology is trying to grow out of a biological or a set pattern that's observed in the human. And that's not the way today's farming is. What's happened today is the way technology has come to agriculture is without any appreciation at all for historically normal patterns. The only goal is, can we grow it faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper? That's the only goal. As if there is no ecological balance sheet. When it comes to nature, there is a profit and loss statement just like everything else. And there is a reason why that a mouse is the size that a mouse is and an elephant is the size of an elephant. I mean, a mouse the size of an elephant wouldn't be a very successful mouse. And an elephant the size of a mouse wouldn't be a very successful elephant. I mean, there's a reason why the average NFL football player dies at 57. When your neck is bigger than your head, you're a freak of nature and it weeds you out. So this notion that life is fundamentally just an inanimate pile of protoplasmic structure to be manipulated however cleverly hubris can imagine to manipulate it, allows us with our technology, without appreciating these normal historical patterns, to, as my dad used to say, innovatively overrun our headlights. So we've actually created things that we can't spiritually, emotionally, mentally, or ecologically metabolize. And so then we spend a lot of our lives, time and energy, trying to solve the problems that we created. Now, let's take one, for example. Let's take, when we look at the natural pattern of, let's just take a real simple one, like herbivores. When I have, school tours at the farm, and any 12-year-old can tell you what an herbivore is. It's an animal that eats plants. All right. So we're standing here with a herd of 100 cows behind us. I'm in the field, got a school. Are you with me? You visualize, all right? And so I turn around and say, what are these? Herbivores. What do they eat? Plants. Well, then can anybody tell me why for 30 years the U.S. took farmers like me to free steak dinners to teach us the new progressive scientific way of feeding herbivores, which is we grind them up and we feed them back to themselves. And this is the new scientific approach to feeding herbivores. We'll all get rich on this technique. And most farmers bought into it. 30 years later, there's this big, worldwide collective, oops, maybe we shouldn't ought to done that. Now, our family didn't buy into that science, not because we were Luddites, although that's what we were branded. Well, they won't join the progressive scientific community. The academic credentialed experts that are telling us this needs to be done. We didn't do it not because we hated the U.S., duh, or because we were anti-science. We didn't do it because search high and low around the planet, we could not find an herbivore who eats carrion. It fundamentally violated the pattern, the historically normal pattern. And so I'm not a Luddite. I'm not anti-technology. My goodness, when you come to our farm, I mean, if you want to see me stand up on my hind legs, it's when somebody comes and says, oh, this is like Grandpa's farm. No, it's not anything like Grandpa's farm. In 5 minutes, I can show you 12 things that Grandpa would have given his eye teeth to have. For example, electric fence. Electric fence. I mean, most Americans, well, have never seen electric fence, but have heard of it. You heard of electric fence? Yeah, okay. Well, we now have this cool fencing that uses a polyethylene weave with stainless steel filaments as small as a human hair entwined in it to conduct a spark that is 10,000 volts using less than 0.25 amps of energy. But because with computer microtechnology, we've been able to shorten the spark down to 4/1000ths of a second compared to when I was a kid and we were starting, electric fencing was in its infancy, and they built the energizers by scavenging the points points and condenser out of an automobile. And you'd go by, there was a box hanging on a fence, and you'd go by, boing, boing, and all of us carried around a little emery cloth in our pocket to always go along and shine up the points, right, on these things. And that spark was 400,000ths of a second. It was so long that resistance would have melted a polyethylene filament with a stainless steel thread running through it. But today, because we've shortened the spark down to 4/1000ths of a second, we're able to pack a 10,000 volt pain punch with almost no energy at all, so we create an ouch factor with no resistance. And so now today, for the first time in human civilization, we're able to have 150 feet of black bear, coyote, chicken, raccoon, mountain lion proof fencing that 150 feet of it only weighs 12 pounds, and one person can pick it up and re-put it down in a new place, portable, in less than 10 minutes. I mean, as they say, who'da thunk? This is amazing stuff, because what it means is that for the first time in human history, we are able to biomimic functional ecological patterns more precisely than nature ever could at the beginning. So this is not about dominating, manipulating, and adulterating and prostituting nature. It is coming to nature humbly saying, what's your pattern? Now, what kind of technology allows us to massage this ecological womb and catalyze it better than it would in a static state? See, we have this notion in our culture, this extremely abnormal notion. We're the first culture in human history that has ever had the luxury of being able to think, even, to conceive that we can abdicate our visceral relationship with our ecological umbilical. I mean, most people think it's far more important to be passionate and aware of the latest belly button piercing in Hollywood celebrity culture than what's going to become flesh of our flesh and bone of our bones at 6 o'clock. And so we have, as a culture, abdicated these visceral, relational connections and responsibilities to this ecological womb. And so we've got people, growing up that have no concept of what a pullet is, or a heifer, or last year, we spent 3 days with the state veterinary, animal abuse people because we got turned in because some lady drove by, probably some country club hair coiffure. She's been to the beauty saloon, and probably had her little poodle Fifi in the front seat driving, to her little, card club thing, and looks over, and here's a herd of 300 cows that are ready. We move the cows every single day because we have electric fence. So we're mimicking this moving, mobbing, mowing pattern of the wildebeest and the buffalo and the predator-prey relationship on the landscape. So every day we move them at 4 o'clock to another paddock. This big herd of cows. She drives by, sees this big herd of cows by the gate that we're getting ready to move into the next thing. She calls animal control and says, there's a big herd of cows here in a crowd. Crowds concern me. I think this is animal abusive because, it's a crowd and that scares me. Crowds scare me. And so, of course, animal abuse can't tell the woman, they call it a herd for a reason. I mean, they like to be in a herd. There was nobody around them. They were just standing there chewing their cud, waiting for the gate to open. They knew it was going to come at 4 o'clock. All cows have one big 3-inch nerve from their brain to their, they got 4 stomachs. They got a lot of sensory perception. Anyway, they couldn't laugh at her, so they had to, go investigate the report. Took 3 days of our time dealing with bureaucrats to deal with something that probably some, Bambi-eyed, Disney-fied animal rights something or other that had no cognitive. If you'd have asked her, ma'am, do you know which end of a cow gets up first when they stand up? She wouldn't have a clue which end of a cow stands up first. And so what we have now is an incredible ignorance in our culture that for the first time is quite profound. I mean, it manifests itself, for example, in how we genetically select. This is not genetic manipulation. This is just historically normal genetic selection. Like, Mendel's peas. When people say, GMOs is just like Mendel's peas. No. GMOs, Mendel was doing peas on peas. He wasn't doing peas on salmon, on humans, on pigs, on tomatoes. Look, if the sexual plumbing doesn't match up, it ain't right. I mean, if you see a pig getting it on with a tomato plant in your garden, you look at that and say, well, that's weird, right? Well, that's what they're doing out there at Monsanto, right? And not only that, but these new life forms that nature has erected all sorts of barriers to preclude them from occurring, these new life forms inherently need to be promiscuous. And they don't respect boundaries. And so here you are out here on your, little piece of land, and suddenly these, new life forms that are owned by this big corporate entity come across your fence and give you life forms that you don't want. If my bull went onto your farm and, raised havoc with your heifers in your fence in your cornfield, I'd be liable for my bull's damage on your farm, right? But not only is Monsanto not liable for the damage, according to the courts of our land that are bought and paid for by the big corporate structure, I am liable to pay them a royalty for the privilege of having their life forms marauding across my property. Folks, this ain't normal. I mean, what happened to your fist ends at my nose? Where was I? So here we are. What? Mendel's peas. Yeah. So here we are trying to select, and we know breeds. I mean, we've got Herefords and Holsteins and Angus and cows. We've got Tamworths and Osabwa and Yorkshire pigs, and we've got Katahdin and Dorper and Hampshire sheep. All right, you're familiar with breeds, right? All right. Well, the way these breeds have been selected over the years, and the reason most of them have geographic names like Yorkshire, Guernsey, Holstein, all right? The reason they have these geographic names is because over time, in a certain bioregion, this particular form was found to be adapted to the environment, to the local climate. And so over time, a certain physiology and phenotype were selected. I mean, think about the wild animals that you see. Think about the wildebeest or deer out here that you see. I mean, there's not much difference in them. They almost look identical, don't they? Because in the wild, all form is derived straight from function. There's nobody sitting out here saying, this is not a real deer because she doesn't have a 3-inch white strip on her back left leg. There's nobody doing that kind of stupidity. And so nature selects them out. And so on our farm, what we've tried to do is line breed and let function drive form. Well, how do you get to functionality? You get there by letting nature take its course. So, one of the big issues that we're dealing with right now is, we don't drug everything when it gets sick. I'll give you a story. Our son, Daniel, he was 8 when he started with his rabbits. Somebody gave him 2 does and a buck. That's enough to start with rabbits. And he started with a 4-H project. Well, these rabbits were typical rabbits, you couldn't feed them forage or they'd get diarrhea, whatever. And so he resolved at 8 years old, he's 31 now, so 23 years ago, that we wanted to do line breeding and not do any medications and select for forage ability. So we set up this kind of, criteria of we wanted a rabbit that was pretty close to a wild rabbit, except we were raising them for domestic, and yes, we do eat them. And so we started down this path. Well, for the first 5 years, he went through 50% mortality. By denying them medication and by giving them, of all things, imagine giving a rabbit grass. I mean, who would give a rabbit grass? But read any rabbit book, in America today, don't give them any grass or they'll get diarrhea and die. Okay, well, a lot of them do. But some of them don't. And those are the ones he began selecting, the ones that all, mites in the ears and sore hocks and the long teeth and all the things you read about and all the, raising rabbits in your backyard, whatever, okay. Went through them all for 5 years, 50% mortality. But what he's got now, 23 years later, is a vaccine, medication-free, forage-based, probably the only large commercial flock in the country, if not the world, that's been 23 years completely selected on phenotypical and physiological and healthful adaptation to a non-medicated forage-based regimen. Now, what if some animal rightist had found out that 50% of our rabbits were dying? We can't let Peter die. We'd have been jailed. See, the only way to know if the rabbit, if all of you here walked in with crutches this evening and I wanted somebody to run a race for me, how am I going to know who can stand up on their own 2 feet if I don't start knocking out the crutches? Now, and yet here, the very kinds of things, the very kind of selection process that nature uses to come to a Bambi in the field. Is anybody coming in and rescuing the little ones or the big ones or the weird ones or the limpy ones no. Nature weeds them out, and that's how we have wild animals. And so here we're trying to go back to a wild system. I mean, we're line breeding. I mean, we sometimes even breed fathers to daughters. But does anybody come in here to the wild deer herd and say, that buck over, he might breed his daughter next year. We better come in here with a helicopter and capture that dude and take him out of here about 80 miles so he can't come back here and do any, hanky-panky going on around here. Somehow nature just figures it out, doesn't it? It just works. But we're in a time where the only relationship most people have with an animal is, with their $1,000 a year golden retriever sitting on a $200 LL Bean rug in the air-conditioned Andy room, reading their grandkids Bambi and Thumper. And we've completely disconnected. We even have discussions about the ethics of eating meat, as if there's, folks, everything is eating and being eaten, and if you don't believe it, go lie naked in your flower bed for 3 days and see what gets eaten. I mean, the very notion that we can have life without sacrifice is a fundamental assault upon the most basic of ecological principles, which is life, death, decomposition, regeneration, life, death, decomposition, regeneration. That's the cycle of life. And when you present, what does it mean when we present to young people this notion of we can actually have life without death? What does that say to young people? How much more powerful it is when I speak to a group of kindergartners or elementary students, describe this principle and say, now, if you really want to live, you'll sacrifice for your family, your parents, and your school friends, and you'll lay down your life for them because it's in the sacrifice that the regeneration occurs. Suddenly you have a meaningful, powerful metaphor for a meaningful life and a legacy. So it is that fundamental, visceral connection and appreciation for life that defines reasonable and commonsensical culture. And when our ecology, our economy, our sociology, and our theology all line up, suddenly we know we're on to truth. But we live in very abnormal days. For the first time in human history, we're able to take animals and stack them up in buildings by the hundreds of thousands and bring them cheap grain. See, grain has never been cheap before. It's always been expensive throughout human history. It's always been expensive. I mean, when you had to grow grain, all right, grain is an annual. Everybody with me? An annual. Annuals, perennials. Okay, you got to make sure. Okay, annual. All right, that means it has to be planted. That means you have to prepare the ground. All right. Well, before cheap energy and mechanization, preparing the ground meant walking behind an ox or a mule or a yak or a water buffalo with a sharp stick. Right? All day, back and forth, very close to the rear end of a draft animal, back and forth, whoop, back and forth, right? Okay, all right, you're with me. All right, at the end of the day, you've got this little tilled up area, so now we get to go and throw on some seed. It sprouts, some of it sprouts, hopefully, and now we get to go with a crude hoe and hoe out the weeds and stuff, and then it finally grows up here, it gets mature, it's standing up here, and we get to go out with a scythe or a sickle, right? And we get to cut it, and then we put it in a shock, all right? So it can dry down in the field a little more. And then a couple of weeks later or a month later, we come and we take those shocks into a threshing floor, which might be hard-packed earth, it might be some planking of boards, might be a crude cement-type mixture, but anyway, a hard floor, and we pile it there, and we begin to flail it. We thresh it. We might run oxen over it. We might call all the kindergartners to play tag over it, or anything to flail it and break off the chaff, the husks from the heavy grain. That's all done. Then we get to take a crude fork and pitch it up in the air on a breezy day. The air blows the chaff away, the light chaff, and the heavy grain falls to the ground. So at the end of the day, we get to reach down here and we've got a little bit of grain. Now we get to try to preserve that until next year in some sort of a rodent-proof container before the invention of sheet metal, plastics, and wire mesh. And that's why the Antiquities talk about some of the largest army deployments were to protect the big clay pot jars that were holding the year's grain supply. It was precious. I mean, the Old Testament biblical book of Hosea talks about a harlot being sold for 9.5 ephahs of barley. That's about 2.5 bushels. It's not because harlots were cheap. It's because grain was expensive. And so suddenly now, with this bonanza of cheap energy and mechanization, for the first time in human history, we've been able to create cheap grain. Of course, we've made a dead zone the size of New Jersey and the Gulf of Mexico in the process, and in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, where I'm from, we've lost 8 feet of topsoil in 200 years. But anyway, without regard to that, it hasn't run out yet, so we still think we're, in good shape. And we can grow, in fact, we subsidize the continued abuse of the soil through the U.S. And so we've got all this grain production, and now, for the first time, we're able to bring it to confined animals. See, historically, all these animals were up tight around carbon cycles. Omnivores, there wasn't enough grain to feed omnivores. That would be chickens and pigs, by the way. All right. So the herbivores and seafood were always the mainstay of indigenous antiquity diets because those were the only 2 nutrient-dense foods that could be grown without tillage. Omnivores were special, precious, expensive. And so chickens were put up against homesteads as a recycler of spoiled foods and blemished foods and kitchen wastes. And pigs ran in the periphery around in the oak trees and the forest and pinyon nuts, and they scavenged as edge scavengers. And the mainstay was herbivore: llama, alpaca, sheep, cow, buffalo, wildebeest, zebra, elephant, giraffe, camel. There's a lot of herbivores, all right? But now we've been able to feed the herbivore grain in a big feedlot, and we've taken the omnivores and segregated them so that we have, for the first time in human civilization, been able to create a segregated food system instead of an integrated food system. So now we even give Greenie Awards, for institutions that get really progressive, about taking their kitchen scraps, putting it in a separate barrel so that it can go off to a composting site 10 miles away on a diesel truck, and then imported the compost back as greenie fertilizer to put around our azaleas and rose bushes and special little, things. No, what's really green would be to hook a little chicken house right next to the kitchen, take the kitchen scraps right into the chickens eat the kitchen scraps, lay eggs. Now nothing has to go on a diesel truck, including the eggs. That's a fundamentally integrated approach. And that kind of integrated system is how that's the pattern of nature throughout history. Edible landscaping. I mean, how lawns were created. Lawns came about from the British when there was enough to separate the wealthy from the unwealthy. I'm wealthy enough, I don't have to have cucumbers next to my back door. And so lawns were created as a status symbol of royalty to show people that I'm not dependent on the vegetable patch. And now in America, we have 40 million acres of lawn. We have 36 million acres growing feed and housing recreational horses. That's 76 million acres. Folks, that's enough to feed the entire country without a single farm. So as we head into the future, what I'm suggesting is that we're going to use high-tech things like black plastic pipe and computer microchipped energizers and electric fence controllers and feather netting and portable gentle infrastructure. I mean, before just very recent days, you couldn't mill lath material in lumber because the kerf on a blade, on a whether it was a pit sawn or a blade, the kerf was 1/4 of an inch. So every 4 cuts, you lost 1 inch of lumber. So you couldn't afford to mill small dimensional stuff because it all turned the log into sawdust. That's why any kind of lath or small dimensional material you wanted had to be created by splitting with a froe. And so you had to use 4-foot pieces of wood, straight grained, that you could then hammer a froe down through and wiggle it, and that's how you made lathing for, for plastering and old time work. All right. Today, with modern bandsaw mills that only take a 1/10 of an inch kerf. On our farm, we have an a bandsaw mill, only weighs 800 pounds. I mean, you can put it behind a Honda Civic and tow it to the woods. You know, you're in the lumber business, runs on a 20 horsepower Honda engine. You mill all day on a gallon of gas, and it makes about a wheelbarrow load of sawdust. And we can now mill 1/2 inch by 1 inch lath material to create portable infrastructure, because when we look at the natural patterns, they're not very elaborate. They're fairly simple. And one of the biggest patterns in nature is animals move. They're not stationary. They're not locked up in big factory confinement houses that divorce the animal from its feed, from its fertilizer input, and divorce its manure from the land that it should bless. Instead, the manure is so concentrated it becomes a liability instead of a blessing. And so we have fundamentally broken apart these very complex, intricate carbon cycles that were fundamentally the way nature built soils and replenished itself. And so here we are with this bandsaw mill now, that we can make very lightweight little lath material and timber to make lightweight infrastructure to pull around the fields with this lightweight electric fencing, and suddenly we can have large flocks of hens in a natural setting, on pasture, more hygienic, sanitarily, and protected than a handful of 6 scavenging chickens in a dirt backyard on an American homestead 100 years ago. And the chicken is allowed to express its chickenness in full joy. You see, we believe that good farming should be aesthetically and aromatically, sensually romantic. You know, if you've got to walk through sheep dip and put on a hazmat suit to go visit your food, you might not want to eat it. And so, creating a habitat in which the pigs can express their pigness and the tomato can express its tomatoes reverences, honors, and respects that sanctity of being. We are surrounded inside and outside with a host of beings. We have 3 trillion inside of us. I'm convinced if you walk down the average sidewalk in America to the soccer mom and say, "Ma'am, do you realize there are 3 trillion bacteria inside of you?" She'd say, "What? Cut me open, pour in the Pine Sol, get the antimicrobial soap out," right? Actually, if we could look at each other with an electron microscope, you know, we would all look like Pigpen in the Peanuts, you know, with this aura of beings that are, you know, chopping each other's heads off and desiccating each other and, you know, and zapping and moving and, all right, this is all happening. You know, we're not sterile beings. The idea is to create a terrain in which the good bugs beat the bad bugs. That's the idea. And of course, that's still the battle going on between Louis Pasteur and his contemporary, Antoine Béchamp, who were both, you know, Frenchmen. Of course, Louis Pasteur, he was handsome and flamboyant and did a great, you know, CNN interview. And of course, he propounded the germ theory. And these little bugs, they're going to kill us. We got to annihilate them. Antoine Béchamp came along and said, "Au contraire." He said, "Yes, there are those little bugs, but what allowed those little bugs to get me is a breakdown in the immunological terrain." And that's a fundamental divide in our culture right now as to whether disease is as expression of pharmaceutical disadvantage, or is it a breakdown in the immunological terrain? And that defines the difference in conventional AMA, you know, cut and burn medicine, which is great for, you know, allelopathic medicine if I, you know, amputate my arm or if I'm in trauma. That's where it works great. It doesn't work great for cancers, diabetes, obesity, and these chronic non-infectious diseases in which, by the way, the U.S. leads the world. And it's because we have abandoned historically normal eating. I'm a big believer that if it wasn't available before 1900, you probably shouldn't eat it. You know, if it wasn't available for grandma, it probably isn't worth eating. You know, and we can all be very thankful that hot dogs were introduced at the 1890 World's Fair. I mean, just slipped in right there under the wire, right? I mean, for the first time in human history, the average American eats many times a day food that has ingredients that you can't pronounce. We've never tried that before. Or food that you can't make in your kitchen. You ever try making high fructose corn syrup or monosodium glutamate or, stearate, hypoxylate, whatever, I mean, you can't make that in your kitchen. We're a guinea pig culture. And the thing that I'm trying to express is that we have short attention spans, short memory spans. And this notion that we're going to be such a clever, technologically advanced nation that we're going to extricate ourselves once and for all from that mundane agrarian umbilical and sail off free at last from the soil, free at last from earthworms, free at last from bacteria into some, breakfast pill on a Star Trek Enterprise in a galaxy far, far away. It ain't going to happen. Because we are fundamentally biological beings. Fundamentally. We are not fundamentally machines. There are many mechanical components in our lives. You know what the biggest difference between machines and biological beings is? Mechanics and life, shall we say? The biggest difference is that machines can't heal. If you go out of here tonight and start heading home and you hear this terrible thump, thump, thump in your right front wheel bearing, you can get out of the car, go around and apologize to that wheel bearing. I'm so sorry I didn't put grease in you. Have I been working you too? Have you been spinning too hard? Has life been stressful? You need a rest. I mean, we can talk to that wheel bearing all night. We can go, put it on a year sabbatical. When you come back and get in the car and drive, what's it going to do? Thump, thump, thump. Life can heal. And we can be very grateful that living things can heal. We can forgive. Our wounds can scab over. And that's the fundamental difference between machines and life. And what we've done is we've allowed ourselves to swallow this idea that we don't have to participate in life anymore. The computer is far more interesting in life. iPhones are far more interesting in life than life. And so it doesn't matter that we know where our kitchen is. It doesn't matter that we don't have a cookbook. All we do is go to the store, buy the box and nuke it, and we graze through life. We don't eat together as a family, and we have created a profound ignorance of domestic culinary arts. I mean, I'll be very sexist for a moment. All of our customers are women. I mean, we don't sell anything to men. I mean, men just, they just look in the refrigerator, grunt, and say, honey, I can't find it. I mean, men are useless. So, all of our customers are women. I mean, do you know that just as recently as like 30 years ago when we started selling these pastured chickens, you couldn't go to a supermarket and buy a boneless, skinless breast. If you had a recipe that had boneless, skinless breast, you had to go get a chicken and a knife. Imagine that, a knife and a cut, and you had to dissect that bird. Imagine that. You had to separate that thing, and then you took the other pieces and you put them in for stock and all that, all right? Today, 50% of our customers don't even know a chicken has bones. I mean, they think these boneless, skinless breasts are just out here, It's like we go out and pick them like cherries off a tree, And we've got to explain to people, ma'am, do you understand that chicken nuggets in the shape of Dino's the dinosaur is not a muscle group on a chicken? We don't have domestic larders anymore. The food is all in some warehouse. The average American goes to the supermarket 6 times a week. Imagine just in 1946 is the first supermarket that came. Imagine in 1945 you couldn't go to a supermarket. And there are people alive today that can remember that. scarcely a generation removed. You know, and we went enamored of everything sterile and static and mechanical. I mean, even to where we raised a generation of asthmatic sufferers on Enfamil and Similac during the 25 years that our culture summarily decided that, you know, that breastfeeding babies was Neanderthal and barbaric. I've often thought, you know, the greatest resource lost in our whole culture was that time when all those breasts didn't get used. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible resource loss. You know, who would have thought in the late 1950s and early 60s that by 1970s we'd have La Leche League and Lamaze and a new generation of dads-to-be that wanted to go in and see it and not pace like Dick Van Dyke, you know, outside the waiting room. And so our culture has gradually begun to awaken, and this whole local food, integrity food tsunami is a pendulum, a soul revival, if you will, awakening of wanting to find the heritage, the anchor and the meaningful thing of life. What is it that has glued civilizations together? And I'm suggesting that these patterns, these ecological patterns, these social patterns, and culinary domestic arts and the family table and using the kitchen as the first chemistry lab. You know what happens when you add this to this. And the first mathematics lab, a quarter teaspoon and a half a cup. And to learn that fractions are part of an integrated life. To view that integrated whole of the domestic and the local and the familial into life as the springboard of reality rather than just a segregated hubris-sponsored wiggle your thumbs in front of a computer screen like I've got the world by the tail, baby, and I can just make it do whatever it wants. You know what? The world is bigger than you, and it's bigger than me, and it's time that we teach our kids gardening and kitchen skills so that they learn that there's something bigger than just a computer and a micro screen and icons that jump around at their little wiggles. And I would suggest that as we move into the future, we're going to take our computers with us. Yes, indeed. But maybe we ought to take them at halftime. And maybe we ought to get our kids out in the garden where they're growing the tomatoes and they realize when the tomato wilts and dies, it's dead. I mean, you don't wait 3 seconds and the garden springs you up a new one. And so we come to life with an awe and a mystery of this great world, and we get in our kitchens and we get in our pantries and we prepare, package, and process our foods, and we know our farmers better than Disney World, and we actually lie down with our beloveds at night surrounded by the earth's abundance with a visceral, participatory object lesson of grace. And that creates a world that our technology will come as a friendly assistant, not a slaving master to us. And going firmly with this grip of heritage normality with technological improvement, realizing that both are important to embrace a future that actually regenerates, that actually works, that actually can feed the world and creates an appreciation for this great mystery of the universe, this life, this world, this planet, this ecology, the earthworms, upon which we all depend. That kind of humble, eyes wide open, creates a balance that will protect us from overrunning our headlights and give us an opportunity to leave a legacy for our children and a life and a planet that's worth inhabiting. Are we up for the challenge? Yeah. Great. Thank you very much for letting me visit with you. Thank you. Okay, we have, 10 minutes?
Yep.
For questions? I went just a little bit over, but I couldn't get stopped. You're a wonderful, wonderful audience. You've been very kind. Who has a question? We're going to go 10 minutes, right? And then we'll be done. So who's got a question or comment, anything? Oh, I choose? Oh, you want to make me be the bad guy? Oh, okay. Well, right here then. Yeah. Wait a minute. Get the microphone.
Thank you for being here. Obviously, you've been speaking mostly about livestock. Wondering if you have, I'd love to hear what you have to say about marijuana.
Marijuana?
Yeah.
I believe when the government reaches into my throat and through my nostrils, that's an invasion of privacy. And a government that can keep me from hurting myself will also keep me from healing myself. You can't have both. The ability, Ken and I were actually talking about that today, talking about, if the bicycle were invented today, it would never be able to come to market. I mean, what? You're going to have a little spinning wheel that close to the cuff, Consumer Product Safety Commission would never let a bicycle, go. The fact is that the ability to choose my risk is fundamentally to who owns me. And if I don't own me, then who does? And I think what we have right now is a culture that has kind of foolishly determined that society owns me. And that leads us down strange paths. And so, yeah, I'm for the legalization of all drugs. Because then we'd be able to have raw milk if we wanted it, or alternative cancer treatment, or whatever, all right? And I find it fascinating that in Florida now, maybe y'all are aware of this, that if you want the really good food in Florida, you get the stuff that's labeled for pet food. And I'm desperate to have that in Virginia. I want to sell pet food really bad. Yeah. Okay, next question. Good question. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Hello, my name's Lisa. My biggest question or my biggest struggle trying to implement the lifestyle that you're talking about is getting past all of the marketing that you see on food products. And how can you know that the meat that you're consuming is actually grass-fed versus coming from the factory farms? Is there a certain label that you should be looking for? Do you have any advice for that?
I do. The first answer is we need to look at the supermarket like a bad drug addiction. Just wean yourself away from it. What that means is that you are going to become responsible for your food, not the USDA, not the FDA, not a labeling law. And so, take your entertainment dollars. Now, not the time and money that you would spend coming to these IHMC lectures, but everything else. And, get rid of Netflix. We don't have a TV in our house. So it gives me a lot of time, all right? And go visit your farms. There is, believe me, right here in Florida, there is an entire subculture. There are farmers here tonight. Could you stand, farmers? Stand up. Stand up. Good deal. Great. Okay. Talk about abnormal. For the first time we're the first civilization in human history that has ever had twice as many people incarcerated in prison than we have growing our food. I mean, and we think this is so successful, other countries need to be like us. All right, so I wish that I could snap my fingers and a little fairy would come down and say, eat this, eat that, but ultimately, it's up to us. I mean, we have gone to find our apple juice. We have gone to find, things that we want to eat. And so you just have to put some effort on it. And the average American has lots of time and money to spend on things. We do. I mean, do we really need Disney World? Do we really need Las Vegas? Do we really need Hollywood? Do we really need Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken? Do we really need lottery tickets? Do we really need $100 designer jeans with holes already in the knees? I mean, do we? Final analysis, we each make our situation. Okay, I'm not a victim guy. All right, and so believe me, there are farmers here, and there's an entire subculture of integrity food and integrity land management being practiced. Go patronize it. These guys are desperate for business. And that doesn't take an act of Congress. It doesn't take, walking around with a placard anywhere. It just takes you and I being responsible for connecting and massaging this umbilical and making that decision. And when we make that decision, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 begins a revolution. Another question. Got time for probably 2 more. Yes, ma'am. Wait a minute. Wait for the mic.
I want to emphasize what you were just saying and respond to your question also. Many of us not only are, thank goodness for the farmers here, but there are a lot of backyard vegetable gardeners.
Yes.
I have been 40 years or so an organic vegetable gardener. I live in East Hill right now, and I have a small vegetable garden in my yard, in my backyard, and I can grow a lot of food out of it. Also, pay attention to our farmers market, the Palafox Market downtown. You're going to encounter people who are growing the food locally and bringing it so that it is available to us who are not perhaps able to have a backyard garden. And the third thing that I would like to mention is continue to read and expose yourself to possibilities, including, for example, Barbara Kingsolver's book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, in which her family,
Right.
Can I just say briefly what it is? That
Yeah,
her
they went a
family
year.
took a year's pledge on their family farm in West Virginia, I think it is, or Virginia.
It's Southern Virginia. Yeah.
Southern Virginia. They took a
We
year's
Virginians
pledge.
take that line between Virginia and West Virginia really
I know, I'm so
serious.
sorry. Forgive me. It's like, I must tell you, it's like we Northwest Floridians
Yeah.
take that line with South Florida and Central Florida. So we understand.
Yeah.
But in that book, and what they did is they took a year's pledge to eat only locally garnered food. And it was the one caveat, they did have chocolate. The daughters
they had-
insisted on
did
that,
they have
and they
coffee?
had coffee.
Coffee,
That
yeah.
was the thing, that they had chocolate and coffee.
coffee, yeah.
But otherwise, they gathered their food from the local region.
Yeah. And and listen, don't be a slave to this, all right? But here's the thing, every single person can interact with the soil at some level. And just look in the mirror and say, what can I do? One more back in the, who had, okay, that's fine, you, yeah. Go ahead.
Wait for a microphone.
How you doing, Mr. Joel? My name is Colleen, and I enjoyed the speech very much.
Yes, thank you.
It reminded me when I was a little girl, my father, he had a backyard farm. And I want to know, is it anything that you can do to get the teachers here to let the kids have like a farm day where they can start beginning to plant, little things like that?
Sure. Well, farm to school programs are wonderful, and all of this. There's no law precluding any of this stuff. All it takes is a passionate leader. Our world still follows burning bushes. And so I don't mean the Bush family. I mean the burning bush. Everything's got to have a caveat today, isn't that the truth? And so these are powerful metaphors. I'll give you one example. I was in California, and there's a farm to school program there where I met the two farmers, have a 2-acre farm near a middle school, okay? And the students come out the first day of the class, and it's linked up with the environmental sciences program in the school, all right, biology and all that, all right. And the first day, the teachers tell the students, these 8th graders, bring food. And so the kids bring, Wonder Bread, Twizzlers, and Cheerios, and Fruit Loops, and so they go up, and there's this big, like a 6 foot by 2 foot by 3 foot deep earthworm vermicomposting box. Okay, earthworms. All right. They open the lid, and they let the kids bury all these things. The white Wonder Bread stuff. It all goes in. They bury all this stuff over here. And then the teachers go over here on this side, and they bury an apple and a piece of meat and a banana fresh sprouted whole wheat bread, all right, in there, and some, some grapes, okay, buried over here. 2 weeks later, the students come back. They're primed. They go running up. They open the box, and they go digging through here. And, of course, they pull out the white Wonder Bread. They pull out the Cheerios. They pull out the Fruit Loops. They pull out the Twizzlers, right? Throw it all out. They go over here, start digging through. There's nothing there. Well, the obvious question is, why would you want to eat something worms won't even eat? And so there are these fantastic, lessons for life to build these connections and build common sense reason into our culture that we don't get when we just, are divorced from these very visceral foundations to the interplay, to the intricacy interplays of life. It's fundamental. Who's in charge here?
On that great point, let's thank our speaker.
Okay, listen. Hold it. Now, all right. This is my trademark, so bear with me. All right. Thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful to be with you. I got to tell you one story as we close, and that is that, you've heard your mother. You've heard some stuff here tonight. Some of you are going to go here and think about some of these things. And some of it's daunting. It scares you. It's going to take time. It's going to be a new, journey into a wild beyond that we're not familiar with. And it scares us because we have this voice in the back of our head, probably grandma, some matriarch, saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing. Right. Yeah. Well, okay. You know what? She's wrong. The truth is, if it's worth doing poorly first. We're coming up on Thanksgiving next week. See my turkey tie? Okay. Coming up on Thanksgiving. All right. Next week, you're going to be with the whole family, right? Crazy Uncle John and the whole, okay. All right. So you're going to be there, and there's going to be the newest little addition to the family, little Janie, maybe 7 months, right? She's crawling around on the floor, and everybody's talking, all the adults. And Janie comes up here to the chair. She gets a hold of it. She pulls herself up, and she totters. She looks around terrified, Suddenly, probably her mother sees her, and she says, look, Janie's starting to walk. Look, it's the first time she's fully, and all eyes, fixed on Janie, and they all go nuts. She realizes she's the center of attention. She smiles real big, and suddenly she loses her focus and her grip, and she falls plop down in her diaper. Now, what does everybody do? No, they don't. They come around and they say, well, Janie, if you can't walk any better than that, just quit. No, we get, oh, Janie, try again. Get up here and walk. But what happens is, as we become adults, we have this voice, if it's worth doing, right. And it's stigmatizing. It makes us timid about trying something new lest we fail. And so what I want you to do is go away tonight. I want you to think about when this seems daunting and, oh, no, I don't know if I could go to farmer's market. Oh, I don't know. I might go to a farm. I've never been to a farm. I don't know what's going on a farm. If all this sounds intimidating, all right, look in the mirror, hike up your diaper, and say, if it's worth doing poorly first. Because that's the way innovation happens. That's the way progress happens. It is that disturbance of plopping on the diaper that incentivizes and creates the opportunity for the next innovative thing. So will you do that for me? Now may all your carrots grow long and straight. May tomato blight infect somebody else's tomatoes. May the radishes be large and not pithy. May all of your culinary experiments be delectably palatable. May the rain fall gently on your fields, the wind be always at your back, and your children rise up and call you blessed, and may we all make this a better world than we inherited. Thank you so much for letting me visit with you.